All right, so a couple years ago, I made this video called How to Use the Sanford MIDI Library with C# and WinForms. And a few people found this video useful, but I primarily made it for myself because I knew I'd want to revisit this package in the future. And I have come back to this video a few times. Today, I'm going to be making a similar video, mostly for myself in the future, but because it's a very cool technology, I thought I'd upload it to YouTube so that you can see how to use this as well. And specifically, that is the CefSharp library. Today we're going to make an Electron style application, but instead of using Electron, we're going to put Chromium web browser on a WinForms project that we can then control from C# or whatever .NET language you wanted to use. This is really cool. In some ways, it's more powerful than Electron because we get to use .NET to interface with the operating system, while we can still use, HTML, CSS UI, etc. for the UI. So this is based on this tutorial from thechriskent.com. It's a page from 2014, and I followed this tutorial. I think I had to change it a little bit to get it to work. But I'm going to show you how I got it working today in 2023, specifically June 3rd, 2023. So this is still good advice. I will put this link in the description, but I figured I'd want to create a video about this because who knows? I mean, 2014, this is almost a decade old. This article might not be around for much longer. So without further ado, let's jump into Visual Studio and get started. So you can see I have a couple projects that I already created testing this out, but we're going to create a new project and do it from scratch. So here we are in the new project wizard. Now I'm in Visual Studio 2019. I know that the newer versions of Visual Studio might have changed the way that this new project window looks. So whatever version of Visual Studio you're using, just try to create a new Windows Form app in the .NET framework. So I'm going to double click this. We'll call this CefSharp Demo 03 because I think it's the third time I've done it. I'll leave the location and everything default. I'm using .NET Framework 4.7.2. That's probably outdated, but I don't really care because it works for my needs. So I'm going to click Create. And hopefully we can get this going relatively quickly. All right, and so let's just see that the project is working. When I hit Start, we should get our window to pop up. And there it is. So the first thing is I always like to rename this. I hate calling this Form 1, so I'm going to rename this to Form Main. Go ahead and do that. And then on this form, where do we have our properties? There we go. We'll call this CefSharp Demo, and that will change the title there. Make sure everything is still working. Okay, perfect. So now we're going to right click on our project, not the solution, but the project. We're going to go to Manage NuGet Packages. We're going to go to Browse and give it a minute while it fetches stuff. And then we're going to search for CefSharp. All right, so there's a few different versions of this. Specifically, we want the WinForms version. There is, if you use WPF, you could use that version. I'm using WinForms. It doesn't really matter in this case because for the most part, our entire UI is going to be in Chromium. So I don't know. I use the WinForms version. If you're more familiar with WPF, you could use that. But I'm going to get the WinForms version, and I'm going to click the latest, which is pretty recent, and hit Install. And that's fine. I want to make these changes. So NuGet's going to download the latest version of CefSharp. Now, I've been using CefSharp for a number of years. I'd say around 2 or 3 years ago, there was a major change to CefSharp that broke old projects. So if you're watching this video several years in the future, you might have to do a little bit of debugging on your own because CefSharp is basically based on the Chromium web browser. So as Chromium makes changes, the library also gets updates. So there's a lot of development on this. It's constantly changing. It's constantly moving. So, hopefully this video will work for you if you're watching this sometime in the future. But just be aware that this project does get updated quite a lot. Okay, so now we're going to go to our form main. And, if you're new to WinForms, you have this little thing here for like this toolbox. And you can, for example, drag a button out here, and you can make the button do stuff. I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to go to the toolbox, and I'm going to expand CefSharp, and we're just going to put a web browser on this window. Now, what's cool about this web browser is it will automatically fill the window. So if we resize this window, it's set to automatically fill. So at this point, we've basically created a web browser. So the only thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to get rid of on its name somewhere. I have to click it. There we go. It has a 1 after its name. I'm just going to get rid of that 1 because I don't like it. So just hit run and make sure that everything's working. Now, you're not going to see anything happen just yet because it's an empty page, but we can see that everything is working. So now I'm going to go into the code for my my main form, and you can see here we are in our code, and I actually want to go to this one. Here we go. So here we have like our initialized component thing, but what I want to do is I want to configure the web browser that we just put on there. So I'm going to pull some things in here. So using CefSharp, using .winforms. I don't know if I need all these. I think I do though. Using CefSharp scheme handler, using, and I think we need system.reflection eventually as well. What else? I think we need for paths. Okay, so those are all the things I think we're going to need to pull in. But for now, in our basically constructor, so this, if you're unfamiliar with .NET or whatever, so right now we're in the constructor for form main, which inherits from form, which is a partial class, so it doesn't have to implement everything. We're going to create our Cef settings. There we go. And then we're going to say remote debugging port equals, so I do 8090. You could put whatever port you want. This is really cool. This is a new feature of, well, at this point it's a few years old, I think, but compared to the last time I used CefSharp, this is really cool. So this will allow us to use a regular Google Chrome instance in order to debug our .NET project, which you'll see when it's done. It's pretty cool. Okay, and then we'll do Cef.initialize settings. So this will tell, our kind of global CefSharp, module that's been loaded, hey, I want you to use these settings. We call the initialize component, and then we should be able to do Chromium web browser. Now, this one is what's named on our form. So remember how we dragged from the toolbox, we went to CefSharp and we put the web browser on the form? This web browser is called Chromium web browser. So if you had called this something else, it'd be something else in the code there. And I wish I didn't hide my toolbox. How do I get that back? View. There we go. I just want to minimize it. So this is called Chromium web browser. So if we go back to the code, we're saying Chromium web browser dot, and then we can do load URL, and we can say like http://google.com, and then if we save this, let's see what happens. Nope. What's the build error? Forgot a semicolon. I've been doing too much other languages recently. Okay, so there we go. So now this is a form that we created, and we were able to put a web browser on the form and then navigate it to Google. So what's cool is you can see how you can manipulate the web browser directly from C#. Now, there's some other cool features that you can do. For example, you can call JavaScript functions from C#. You can also register a C# function and call it from JavaScript. I'm not going to do that today. What I'm instead going to do is show how to load a custom embedded asset from your project in the web browser. And excuse the noise outside. I live in New York City, and there's a lot of traffic outside of my window. Okay, so let me show you how the remote debugger works. Now, one other thing we have to do for the remote debugger is we have to allow remote origins to connect to our CefSharp. So this is something that you have to do while you're debugging, but you could remove this when you're ready to release your project. So we're going to say settings.cef command line arguments.add, and then we're going to say remote allow origins, and then we'll say from anything. Now this is kind of a funny thing. So settings cef command line args. So you know how you can run the actual Chromium project or Google Chrome browser from a command line on your computer. And when you run it from the command line, you can pass in command line arguments to control how your browser behaves. Well, what we're doing is we're embedding a Google Chromium browser on a Windows form. And, you know, we're basically...
I don't know, but I found these results on search.
Shut up, Google. I'm going to leave that in there. And then that will allow us to... you know, host a web page kind of like Electron on our Windows form. Well, what if you wanted to control some of those command line arguments that you would normally have on a desktop version? Well, in this case, you call cef command line arguments, and we're saying remote allow origins. So we're basically treating this control on our form as a desktop browser, and we're passing in a command line argument right here to tell it to allow remote origins. So if we run this now, here's what's cool. We're going to run this. And remember, its remote debugging port is 8090, and it should say in here, DevTools is listening on WebSocket, you know, 127.89. So I'm just going to copy this. And then in... All right, so here is a version of my regular Chrome web browser. This is just regular Chrome. And in fact, I can just put this tab over here. So we're connected to 8090. If I click on this, you can see I have DevTools, but it's taking up the entire tab. And if we bring up our, I'm going to make this smaller. If I bring up, here is our Google window. If I were to go in here, and you can see as I hover over this, I can edit things. So if we go in here and we drill down, try to find that, well, we'll just change the logo. I'll just delete this, edit as HTML, Hyperbin, YouTube. Did that appear? No, it didn't. Oh, wait. There we go. So I just replaced the Google logo with my YouTube channel. So you can see we have a window that we created. It's got the little .NET logo here. It's got Google loaded into it in our embedded Chromium instance. But then we used a regular Chrome browser. We connected to that port, and then we can use DevTools remotely. So this will allow us to debug our application. Even though we're in .NET, we've embedded a browser on a .NET form, and we can debug it using regular DevTools, which is really cool. So I'm just going to minimize or maximize this. Let's go back to the project and stop it. So now what we want to do is be able to load a web page from embedded in the project. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here into our project. I'm going to say add a folder, and we'll call this UI. And then in this folder, we will add a new item. We'll just pick web, I guess, general. All I want to do is add an HTML file. Actually, last time I did this, it was from, can I just search? How do I don't actually care that I pick it from this list. Okay, we'll just do a text file. There we go. Okay, and then I'll just rename this to index.html. Yep. And then we will create a folder called image. And then I'm going to say explore, open folder and file explorer. Okay. And then I have a picture of a cat that I'm going to put here. Okay, we'll just call this cat. And then I'm going to go to catipsum.com, and let's rerun this. There we go. So now I'm just going to get some cat ipsum using our web browser that we embedded directly into a C# project. Okay, so now I'm going to edit this index.html with some very basic stuff. Actually, we'll put a I haven't written HTML in VS Code. I mean, in Visual Studio ever before. I've always used VS Code. This is kind of weird feeling. Okay. We'll paste in our cat ipsum. Then we'll say image. I might have to remember if this is like relative paths or not, but we'll see what happens. What did I call it? Cat.jpg? Oh, you know what? I might also have to do this. There you go. Say 150. All right, we'll say let's see if this actually works. Okay, so here's what we have. And then I'm going to say oh, you know what? I want to put this there we go. Okay, and then I will also add okay, so there is our page, and you know what else I'm going to do is we'll say margin, and then I could use text align in CSS, but whatever. Okay, so there is our page that we're going to use to embed directly into our project. So right now you can see I'm loading it from my disk, right? This is C, users, etc. So it's loaded from my computer, but I don't want to load it from the computer. I want it to be part of the compiled project. So how can we do that? Well, that's what we're going to do now. So we have our HTML, we have a picture. That's good enough for demonstration purposes. So I can close all of this now. And then let's go to our code. Okay, and so this is basically where we left off with our with this tutorial, and I'm just going to basically go over it, implementing it. So here we have the class for our form. We want to create a new class, so we're not going to do it inside that class. We're going to do it right below it. And we're going to say public. So this is going to be, you can call this whatever you want. We're going to call this resource scheme handler, and it's going to inherit from resource handler. There we go. And basically, a schema is, for example, like when you have, HTTP or HTTPS or, FTP. These are the schemas, right? And then you can create custom schemas that a lot of, applications have done. For example, I think Steam, like if a website wants to link you to a Steam app and it wants to open up your Steam installation, it uses Steam. I've seen various other ones of these custom schemas. So that's what we're doing here. We're creating a resource scheme handler. So we're going to be able to do something like resource colon and then, you know, index.html or whatever. And we're going to have it load this index.html whenever it sees this custom handler. So that's what we're building here. That's what a resource, or that's why I called this resource scheme handler. And I should probably actually spell this correctly. All right. So public override Ceph return value process request async. Okay, and then in here we're going to get a new URI and we're going to create a path to the file. Okay. Forgot my equals here. And then now what we want to do is we want to get a resource, and in .NET your resources are basically like your program name dot whatever and dot, like instead of using slashes it will use periods. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the request which had like a URL, so for example like cat ipsum or whatever, we're going to take that request and we're going to turn it into a resource string. So first we need to get reference to the assembly, which is basically our running instance of the program. So we're going to say assembly ass, and I didn't name it that. That came from the tutorial, but I mean it makes sense. It's the assembly. Assembly dot get executing assembly. So this is basically self-referential. It's basically, you know, within the code we're getting a reference to our own existence. Get the executing assembly. So I think that comes from the reflection library in this case. Okay, so then we're going to say string resource path equals, so we get the name of our executable, and then we add a dot, and then we're going to take the file that was requested from our schema, and we're going to say replace any kind of slash with a period. Whoops. I am not used to Visual Studio's autocomplete. I've been using too much VS Code lately. Okay, so basically what we've done is we've taken the URL, which will have slashes in it, and it'll be something like this, right? It'll be maybe resource colon image comma or slash cat.jpg. It'll be something like that. And what we've turned it into is something like, you know, we'll call this, what is it, ceph test dot image dot cat dot jpeg. We've turned it into that because that's how you reference resources in your application. So that's what we've done here. So now we have the path to the resource. We got the assembly's name, we added a dot, and then we replaced all the slashes with periods. Okay, so now we're going to do that. So we're basically going to say, we're going to ask our running assembly, does it have a resource with this path? If it does, if it's not null, then we can continue. So that means the Chromium web browser has requested a valid resource. We do have it in our project. So for example, if this was resource colon image dog.jpg, well, we don't have that in this folder, so this would be null. Right, but if we're requesting the cat, then we have it. So we're basically checking to see if we have it. So we're going to get basically the data stream there. Okay, and then now we're going to set the MIME type, and basically we're just going to look at the type of the file extension, and we're going to set a MIME type variable. And I'm just going to write this all out because it's a lot, and then we'll talk about it. So we're going to use the get extension feature, which we're using the file from the request URL. And I believe this comes in system.io just to get the file extension, which is a really handy feature. Now, MIME type is not a variable we declared, but we inherited it. Because as you can see, when we created this class, the one that we're editing right now, we extended the resource handler class. And so the resource handler class is where MIME type is actually defined. So we'll do .png, and I'm going to support a bunch of different things because you'll probably want to do it. And there could be probably much better code for how to handle this. You could probably use like a dictionary or like infer file types from some other way. But for our purposes, this is fine. There's probably even like some resource out there of like all file extensions mapped to all MIME types as like a JSON or something that you could probably bring in. I'm not sure what this one is. I think I just copied this one from the example, but whatever. And we'll just basically count anything else as basically binary. So let's see, we forgot a colon here. So basically what we've done is we looked at the file that's being requested from our URL in the resource scheme that we're developing. And based on its file extension, we're just setting this MIME type variable for the things that would logically make sense. And then if we don't find what we're looking for, we'll just do a octet stream. So for example, we could probably maybe if there's a CSS file, which I don't have, but we could like add one for .css or something, right? So that's all we're doing there. And again, this MIME type, we didn't declare this variable, but we're not getting any errors because it was declared in the resource handler class, which is what we are inheriting from. So we're basically just setting it. So then we'll say so at this point, we've successfully like found the file from our resources, and we set the MIME type so the CefSharp browser will know how to interpret that file. And then we're basically these will just continue the CefSharp request. So the web browser is going to make a request, and we're just fulfilling that request. And once we're done fulfilling the request, we found the resource, we got the stream from the file, we figured out its MIME type. We're now basically saying, okay, we can continue, right? So that, and then out here we can say, if we failed, we're canceling, and we're not doing any callbacks. Okay, so then, now this next thing, I'm not really sure. Oh, wait. I don't think we need to do this one anymore. I'm going to delete it. I don't think we need this right now. It's part of like the pipeline for processing a request. We're already returning, so we're fine. Okay, so now I'm not sure why this is the case, but for whatever reason, CefSharp library is very object-oriented, compatible, and it wants us to make a factory for how to consume this resource handler. So we're going to say public. This is this is at the same class level, so it's just the third class in this file. We're going to say custom protocol scheme handler factory scheme handler factory. Okay, and I was saying schema earlier. I think it probably should just be scheme. Okay, and we're going to say public const string scheme name equals resource. Now this is where you would set what you want the path to be. So we're going to do something like resource colon foo.bar dot, actually it'd be foo/bar/image/ cat.jpg or whatever. Like what this keyword is, resource. So if you want your scheme to be something else, this is where we're going to set it. Then we say, this is really simple, iResource handler create iBrowser iframe string scheme name iRequest. Where's request? There it is. Request. And then I think that's it. That's right. Okay. Okay, now it's happy. Basically, this iScheme handler factory will just create a new one of these things that we already made earlier. So this is the factory pattern, right? It's basically saying, okay, this create method will just return a new instance of the scheme handler. And the reason why we want this is because Chromium wants a scheme handler factory as its input. So that's how we tell it how our custom scheme works. So yeah, so basically the Chromium project, the CefSharp project, will call this create function, and it will return a new instance of our class that we just made up here, which implements resource handler. Okay, so that is, I think, the bulk of it. Now we just have to implement it. So we've done all the work. Now we just have to actually set it up. So we're going to say on our settings object. So again, we create an object for settings. We put a remote debugging port in there. We gave it the command line argument to allow us to connect to that remote debugging port. Now we're going to add more. We're going to say settings.register scheme, and then we're saying new Ceph custom scheme, and then we're going to pass into this, put a colon there. We're going to pass into this scheme name, and we're going to say custom protocol scheme handler factory dot scheme name, and then we're going to say scheme handler factory equals new custom scheme handler factory, and there we go. So to recap, basically when we on our settings object, which gets passed into the CefSharp instance, we're telling it to register a new scheme. And then we have a custom scheme, which takes two parameters, the scheme name and the factory for instantiating the scheme handler. So remember I said your scheme name down here, right? That's where we're setting that. So we're saying custom actually this should be called protocol. Should probably actually make sure that that is spelled correctly. Oops. We made a public const here for the name, so we're using resource. So we're basically telling this new custom scheme, the name is going to be resource, and the factory for creating the handlers is this class. And whenever the web browser needs to make a request to this scheme name, it will ask this factory for a new handler. And it says, okay, the new handler is here, and the handler is this thing that we made here. So basically, that's kind of how the flow of this works. And then because we registered this scheme now, and we tell Ceph that we want to use all of these settings, it will now know what to do with that custom scheme. So if we run this right now, nothing should be different. Hopefully we won't get any errors, but nothing should be different. We should just pop up with cat ipsum. But what's cool now is we want to load our custom page. Now, it's not going to work at first, but you'll see what happens. So we're going to say resource, and then we're going to say index, or no, we're going to say UI/index.html. Now, you'd think that this would work because we just said resource. We have the UI folder. Inside the UI folder is index.html, but it's not going to work. And this was one of the trickiest things to figure out why. But once you figure it out, then it's really simple. It's not a resource yet. So all we have to do is anything in this folder, we have to right click. Actually, no, we just click on it. And in build action, we go down here and we say embedded resource. And then we'll do the same thing for the image. Well, actually, we'll try it without the image first. So now we loaded our picture, but it couldn't find the cat image because it's not embedded yet. So let's go to this, and for build action, we will choose embedded resource. And there we go. So what's cool about this is now we have the web browser that's loading in a custom web page that we wrote in our .NET project. We can just go and edit this HTML page right here. We have the cat.jpg right here. And we can load this as if it was a website hosted somewhere. And when we load it, we just load it from our custom scheme, resource, and then the path to it. So, you know, in this case, it's UI/index.html. And so now you could build your entire UI right here in this folder using whatever, you know, JavaScript, HTML type stuff that you want to use. And we can load it directly on a WinForm. And at this point, you don't have to use any Windows controls anymore. Like, you know, you could, if you wanted to, you could still, like, you know, go and put a button here or something. Like, you could do it. Let's see how that renders. I'm curious. Yeah, so here we have a .NET button on top of a web page, which is kind of goofy, but you could do that if you wanted to. But for the most part, your UI can now entirely be in Chromium. Now, I'm not going to get into it right now, but there is a way where you can, it's a little bit, it's beyond the scope of this tutorial because I already have another project that uses it. I mainly wanted to capture in this video how to load an embedded resource in Chromium. And so this is basically, you know, the end of this video. But what you can do is you can make it so that you can call a JavaScript function from C#, and you can make it so that C# can call a JavaScript function. And so this will allow you to have two-way communication between your UI and your C# project. And what's cool about this is you can handle basically like the state and the back end of your application in C#, and then only handle the UI in JavaScript. So you have a very nice separation of concerns. Like all of your business logic that has to interface with the file system or networking, or maybe there's like a C++ DLL that you want to load for whatever reason. Anything like you could talk to the graphics card directly, like anything that you want to do with your system, you can do in C#, and then you can have it all be orchestrated in a JavaScript, HTML, CSS UI. And then you can just communicate back and forth. So it's basically, we made our own Electron here. This is how you would make your own .NET version of Electron. And that about does it. I guess the only other thing is, we can start our custom page. And then if we go to this, we can refresh this. Reconnect. Why is this not opening? Let's just do it from scratch. There we go. And what's cool is, so here's .NET. Here's our .NET window. It has like the .NET icon that we made. It has the title we gave it in .NET. It's clearly loading the web page, but in my regular Google Chrome, I've pulled up the inspector. And what's kind of funny is if you click on this button, you can actually see the web page in your regular Google Chrome. But we can turn that off. And then we can go in here and say, cats are awesome. And then, oh, I want to change this one. Cats are awesome. All right. And, so you can use your regular debug tools for JavaScript just in Google Chrome, just by going to whatever port number you set. But otherwise, that's it. We've made Electron in .NET.